I'm sure you're all aware by now how you can use the Orchestrator to interface to third-party software and to interface to the Internet of Things, to temperature sensors, to devices of all descriptions. But I wonder if you're aware that we can use the Orchestrator purely within JD Edwards to automate and streamline processes. The Orchestrator, when it comes to automating processes in JD Edwards, I'll be using intercompany invoicing as an example. A typical intercompany invoicing process might look something like this. Accounts receivable might enter the invoice, post the invoice, and then send the information on to AP. Accounts payable might enter the voucher, post the voucher, pay the voucher, post the payment, notify AR. Accounts receivable would then receipt the invoice and then post the receipt. There are many places in the manual process where things might go wrong. For example, accounts receivable might not actually send the information to accounts payable, which means that there's an invoice open that's never going to get paid. Or accounts payable might enter the invoice with a different amount to the accounts receivable invoice, and so on and so forth. This is how the automated process might look. Accounts receivable will enter an invoice, and then thereafter it's all automated. The creation of the invoice, the initiation of the payment, the completion of the payment can all be automated through the Orchestrator. This is the process we'll be looking at today in our example. Please note this is an example only. Your own intercompany invoicing process may be different, and it almost certainly will include additional steps. This process is designed simply to show the power of the Orchestrator and not to dictate or design in detail your potential intercompany process. I'll start by showing you the working orchestration, and then I'll take you through the steps to build the orchestration. So here we have a simple invoice that has been entered, a simple intercompany invoice. If I select this invoice, you'll see that this is an invoice between the project management company and our property management company. Invoice number 3293 in this case. You'll notice this looks like the standard invoice entry screen, except there's this additional button here called Process Intercompany Invoice. I'm going to select that button, and what it's going to do is it's going to check that this is actually an intercompany transaction. It's then going to, because it is an intercompany transaction, it's going to create a voucher, it's going to create the payment group, it's going to get the payment control number, it's going to write the payment from the payment group, and it's going to send a message to accounts payable to notify them of the pending payment. Here's the notification that it's sent. So you will notice here that I've got an attachment. This is the intercompany payments. This is the output from the create payment groups. So that has been attached to my email so I can see what payments are going to be made here. In addition, there are two links in my email. So the intercompany voucher can be viewed here, and here's a link, and when I click that link, it takes me directly to the voucher that it created in JD Edwards. You'll note that this voucher, you see there's the invoice number come from the accounts receivable side, and the voucher's pay status is a hash, so it's in the process of, in the payment process, and we're waiting for the payment to be finalized. Then there's another link in my email, complete payment. This is connected to the second orchestration, ready to actually process the complete payment. So by clicking this link here, it will update the payment, create the AR receipt and match it against the invoice, and send a message to AP and a message to AR notifying them of the settlement of this intercompany invoice. So let's click the button. You'll notice the orchestrator comes back telling us that it has done this orchestration successfully. If there was an error in this, it would have failed. It would give us a result of failed over here. Also, because for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm both the AR clerk and the AP clerk, it has sent me 2 emails. One saying that the accounts payable voucher has been settled, has been completed. And again, if I click on this to review the AP voucher, it will take me straight into JDE so that I can see that my voucher now has a status of paid and that the open amount is 0. In the same way, if I look at the invoice, I can see that the open amount is 0 and that this invoice also has been paid. Pay status is P. Right, let's see how we put this together. What we're going to do is we're going to build the steps using service requests and rules. And then once the steps are built, we're going to put the process together into an orchestration. And when we finish that, we'll link the orchestration within JD Edwards so that we can run it. So the first thing we need to do is set up a rule that checks that this is in fact an intercompany invoice. So in order to do that, we'll click on this little box here, Rules. And we can set up the rule. So I've set this one up already beforehand, obviously. And you can see that this rule is quite simple. What I've said is I've given the rule a name, Demo 1R1 check for intercompany. I've given it a product code, 55. Obviously, this is a custom object, so it will go into your general custom object product code. And I've given it a short description. Check that this invoice is an intercompany invoice. Now, just a note here, for those of you that have been working with user-defined objects or citizen developer tools, etc., this rule and all the service requests that we're going to set up and the orchestrator itself, they're all user-defined objects and are controlled in the same manner, as you can see here, as you would Cafe One screens, as you would form personalizations, all of the citizen developer type tools, E1 pages, etc. They're all managed via user-defined objects, and these are no different. So I've given the rule a name, I've assigned it a product code, I've given it a short description, and here's the rule itself. I've said, right, the company, which is usually numeric, you can choose what the type of input should be. And notice that this company here has got a $ before it and it's enclosed in curly brackets. That denotes it as a parameter, and anywhere or a variable. Anywhere that you see this in the orchestrator, it's going to be expecting an input, a variable coming into it to define. So we pass the company into the rule and we say that company must equal a literal value, I've got that ticked there, of 150. So that's how I've decided that this should be an intercompany invoice. The rules for your company or your organization might be very different. In fact, they probably will be different. And there could be multiple rules as well. You see, I've just got the one rule here. There could be multiple conditions within this rule. And note that you can match to any or to match to all. So it can be this or that, or this and that, depending on how you set up your rule. So I've got a very simple rule here saying that the company must equal 150 in order for this to be an intercompany invoice. Right, so with my rule set up, the next thing I need to do is create the AP voucher. So that's the next step. It is a service request, and it's a specific type of service request. If I go and take a look at service requests, there are various different types of service requests, some of which we will use today and some we won't. This one is a form request. A form request is anything that it will mimic an application, an online application. So it mimics your entry of something into JDE, like an AP voucher. Now I can define this form request purely through the Orchestrator Studio if I wanted to, give it a name, assign it a product code, give it a short description, and then I could tell it which application I wanted to run. I could pick the form for that application, the form that I want to start on. I could pick the version that I want to use, and I could then load down the form, and you'll see that when it loads the form in, it loads, here's my form that I'm on, enter voucher payment information. Here are all the buttons that are applied to that form. And if I move further down, I'll see all the fields that I can enter on that form, the business unit, the company, etc., etc., etc. However, there's an easier way in the later releases of Orchestrator to do form requests, to build form requests, and I'm going to take you through the easier way today. So, you need to create the form request to create the AP voucher. So what I'll do is I'll go into speed voucher entry. This is the one that I want to use, and I'm going to actually capture the voucher and record it at the same time. If I click on here, I can say record a process. Okay, I'll start the recorder and I'll simply start typing in my invoice. So I'll say the supplier is 50, the company is 150, and I'll just fill in all the details as I would normally, and it's recording it as I go. The OK button, and I also, when I record this invoice, I need this voucher at least, I need to have the document number passed back, because I'm going to need that document number to feed into the payment. So if I click here on return values, I can then return the document number back. I can return anything from here, anything from the detail. Whatever I've got, I can return in. And then say thank you very much, I've finished, I've entered it, now I will give this a name. So let's call it, for the purposes of this, and I save it. I've called it AP voucher entry for want of a better word. Let me close out of here. And I'll go back into the service requests in the Orchestrator Studio. And here I see my create AP voucher. So it's created it for me. And if I go to take a look, it has done what I would have had to do manually had I come through the form request to enter it through the Orchestrator. So it's making my life a little bit easier. Note that everywhere where I entered something, it's created a variable for me. It's created an input for me. And we'll see how that comes through to the orchestration and how it gets fed into the service request a little later on when we put everything together. So if we look here, these are all the things that I've put in, and then I clicked the OK button. That saved the voucher, and then I returned some information. And if I look down here, I can see all the fields that are going in, and if I find that I've forgotten to put one in, maybe I actually meant to put in payment terms, I can simply add in here payment terms and click this button to add the action. What happens is it adds it up here at the bottom, and I can simply move it because I need it to add the payment into the payment terms before I click the OK button. So, simple as that. I've got my service request. I've got one that I created earlier, so I'm not going to worry too much about this one. That's the service request created to create the AP voucher. Now the next one I need is a service request that will create the payment group. Now the create payment group in JD Edwards is a report or a batch process. So for that, I would use this create service request report. I'll take you through the one that I created earlier. Here it is, create payment groups. You can see that it's a type report up at the top there. And let me go and edit it and show you. Again, I give the service request a name, assign it a product code, and I give it a description. I then pick the report that I want to run. I'm sure all of you know how to find the report name, but if you don't, please just let us know and I'll show you very easily how one finds it in JD Edwards. We also choose which version we want to run, and then we can define, by overriding the version, we can define the data selection going in. Note that in the, I've chosen the document number as going into this create payment groups, and I'm using a variable. It starts with $, and it's enclosed in curly brackets. That's how I know it's a variable. So I'm going to pass through the accounts payable document number into the create payment groups, create payment control groups, in order for it to pick the correct invoice or voucher to be paid. Similarly, I could customize the data sequencing going in, and I can also define all the processing options that I want to go in. For our purposes, I've simply done data selection. This particular version has the rest of the information set up for me. Now, what's interesting here is this fire and forget, or it's quite important actually. If this is set on a report or a batch job that's going to be run from an orchestration, the orchestration will submit that job and then it will forget about it. It will continue with the next step in the orchestration. But if it's not set, like I've got this one not set, it will wait for that job to finish before it continues to the next step. Now, we need it to wait because the next step that we are going to do is we're going to get the payment control group to feed into work with payments. And so we need this to be finished before we can carry it. Once we've defined it, obviously we would simply save it and close. So we've got three steps done now. We've got our condition set up, we've got our voucher, and we created the payment group. The next thing is to get the payment control number. Now for this, we will use a service request called a data request. For those of you familiar with Data Browser, basically a data request is the orchestration doing a data browse. So if I go down and take a look at the data request that I've got set up already, let's get control group. I'm sure this is starting to look familiar to you by now. Give the service request a name, give it a product code, give it a short description, and then we're going to tell it what table we want to look at. If you use Data Browser, you will know how to find the table names. If you don't know the table name, one of the things you can do in here is you can get the view from the form. So for example, in work with payment groups, which is the next step, I see there is the payment control group number. That's what I want to feed back in here so that I can use it on the QBE for data selection. So if I go to Tools and I say Data Browser, that takes me to a form that actually has the payment control group on it. I know this because it's appearing on the screen. However, what the Orchestrator allows me to do is it allows me to click this and I get the About, which then gives me this particular application name, and I can use this application and that form number to get view from form. As it is, I know what the table is, so I'll put it in here. And now what do I want from there? I need to pass into this the document number, the accounts payable voucher number. so that I can return the payment control group number. I know that this particular payment group only has the one payment in because I only selected one payment in the previous step. So let me go down and see somewhere here there is a document number. Here it is. And all I do is I click on this to filter. And if I click filter, it brings the document number across to this side, and it assigns it a variable which you can, the name of which you can override if you like. So it says, right, that's my filter criteria. That's like entering the information on the QBE line. And then secondly, I say, well, what I want back is I want the group control, the payment control group number. So I click this return, and it brings the field in here, and I give that a name. So just like with the data browser, I feed the filter information in, it will return any return fields that I have specified. Right, we now have our payment control group number, which is what we need to feed into the write with payment groups. I'm not going to take you through setting up the write payment because I'll quickly show it to you here. It is another form request. As you can see, it's another form request, and how I created this was I went through the process recorder in JDE itself. If I just collapse these, you will see that this actually has multiple steps in it, as opposed to when we created the voucher, it was just one step. This took us from one step to the next. It's just the same as you're entering it, and as you're moving from step to step, the process recorder records all the steps that you do. We'll notice that input to this I need is the payment control group number. You will see when we pull this all together how that feeds through. And the last step in our first orchestration is to send a message to accounts payable to say, hey guys, something's happened here. Let's go and see. We've set one up. I've set one up here already. So this is again a service request, and it's a type message, a message type service request. I've given it a name, I've assigned it a product code, I've given it a short description, and I'm saying, where do you want this message to go to? I can send it to an email address, which is what I'm doing at the moment, and I could possibly send it to an address book number or a distribution list. These two will land up going to your work center, okay, or to the logged in user. It will go to your work center, or to a contact, and the contact could be a cell phone number, so that you can send an SMS, but that will depend. You will need additional software for that. So I'm sending it to an email address, and the email address I'm sending it is to myself. However, I could just as easily put in a variable here and feed in the email address that I wanted to send to, or multiple email addresses. I can also CC people and BCC people if I like. In the subject, I put in the subject, but I say I want actually to pass through the invoice number. The dollar with the curly brackets denotes that this is a parameter that's going to be coming in, feeding into the message. And the same in the body, I've added certain variables that are coming in. Who's doing what, etc. And then down at the bottom here, I've got some application links. So I've said, link this message, within this message, link to the invoice program to review the intercompany invoice. So the application I'm linking to is PO 411. I'm linking it to this form, this version, etc. If you want to find the application that you are looking for, it's quite simple. You simply go into JD Edwards and you click this about over here, question mark over there and about, and it will give you the application, the version, the form, everything you need to fill in this information. You can also, in the later releases, send link to specific personalized forms, specific queries, and even watch lists. This is simply the text that will appear before the link. This is the text of the link, and this is any text you want to appear after the link. And then, because we wanted to go to a specific voucher in this case, we specify that it must send through a parameter of a voucher number or a variable, the voucher number. And then I've got some hard-coded entries here as well. But this is all the information passing through to the application to make sure that it displays what I wanted to display, the actual record that I wanted to display. So that's the one kind of link that I've got. And that link is this link here on my email. The second kind of link I had on my email was another orchestration, this complete payments. Let's see how we've set that up in the message. So for the orchestration, I went to other links. And here, I've set up a link, a type orchestration. I can also set up a notification. That is a subject for another breakfast. And you can also set up a URL here. So in other words, you can link to anything on the World Wide Web. You can link to any URL you like through the message within the orchestration. Right, I've said it's an orchestration. I've told it which orchestration I wanted to run. I've given it some pretext, I've linked the text that it must display for the link, and then I tell it what parameters I needed to pass. What it's actually done here is it said from this orchestration, these are the parameters I need. These are the variables I need for this orchestration. And so it's come through and brought all of those in. And we can then define them. And you'll see how they get defined when we go through the orchestration itself. The last thing on our message was that we attached this JDE output PDF to our message. Let's see how we did that. What we did here was we went to attachments and we said, please link the text as intercompany payments. That's what it's going to be called. And it wanted from us to know from us what the job number was and what the execution server is. I'll show you how those come through and what type of output do we want. Is it PDF, CSV, etc., etc. So that's how we attached our JDE output to the message. And that's our message setup. So now we've set up all of these steps. Now let's see how we fit them together in an orchestration. So it's quite simple. If we were to start a new orchestration, we will start by giving the orchestration a name. Let's call it Create Intercompany Invoice. Penny invoice. We'll give it a product code. And a description. And then we're going to add our steps in. So the first step we want to add is a rule, because we don't want to create the intercompany invoice if this is not an intercompany invoice in AR to start with. Add the rule. Right, well, what rule are you adding? We'll choose this rule. Now notice that it's already brought in the company number here because that was the variable for my rule. I need that to determine whether this is an intercompany transaction or not. Okay, and what I want to say here is if it's true, then we're going to add a service request. And that service request is my create AP voucher. So just click there. And where is it? Well, there's the one we created. Let's use the original one here. Okay. Create AP voucher. And notice here are all the variables, all the inputs that it needs for this particular service request. If I click, there are none in our orchestration at the moment, but if I click that button, it brings in all the variables from here that it's looking for. It brings them in as inputs to my orchestration. Now I can click this one, which will map them across. However, I'm just going to make this screen big so that we can see it better. However, there are certain things that I don't want to come in as a parameter. For example, the version. I'm going to say, thank you very much. I don't want a version from here. I want to tell it the version that I'd like to use. And the other thing is the account number. I'm not interested in the account number because I want to tell it that I want to use a specific account number, for example. The rest of the information, I'm very happy that it feeds this information in. I can come down to my inputs and say, well, actually, I don't want this account number, so let's delete that out of the equation and let's delete that version out of the equation as well. I'll just leave these inputs here. I might decide that I don't like the names of these things. So, for example, the long address, I might say, well, actually, when somebody is calling this orchestration, I would rather like to call this the supplier, please, because that's what it is. So, I can change its name to supplier. Notice now that it's removed it from here. That's because there's no such thing called long address, but I can map it simply like this. Right, I've got all my inputs mapped there. Also on my rule, I need to map the input as well. So I can click that and it will map the company for input to the rule. And so I would build the rest of the steps in my orchestration. Let me move to the next that there's also these values from steps. And so coming from the create AP voucher, we're sending back the document number and the batch number. So we've returned those values because they need to be fed into the next step. So when we do the next step, which is the create payment groups, it needs this document number in, and we can pick that up from our values from steps. Okay, so that's not coming from our orchestration inputs, that's coming from the previous step. Notice also that this create payment groups, if I look at values from steps, there are a whole lot of things that have come through. You can't see them very clearly over here, but you will see them in the next step, because what we want to do, well, let me just skip down to the message. What we want to do is pass this information through to the message. So if I go and pick the message, notify AP, I've got all these inputs coming through here, and two of these inputs down at the bottom, these are the ones I want to just show you briefly now. The job number and execution server. Remember, we need these in order to provide the attachment, which is the output from the create payment groups. And you see all these values have come from automatically from that report or batch job. And one of them is the job number, and another one of them here is the execution server. So that's how I'm linking the attachment to the email. Now, I have already done all this work before, as you know, so I'm going to go and bring up the original orchestration that I've put together so that you can see the complete orchestration. I edit this orchestration, you can see it in its entirety. So we've got if, basically if, check if the intercompany, if it is an intercompany voucher. If it's true, then we create the voucher, we create the payment, we get the payment control group number, we write the payment, and we notify accounts payable. Here you can see those inputs again. And all the other inputs, all the variables are coming either from the orchestration inputs or from values that have been passed through from previous steps. And of course, if it's false, in other words, if this isn't company 150 that we're working with, then it's going to send another message. I'm not going to worry too much about that for the purpose of this exercise. Right, so the whole thing is now set. We've got our orchestration, we've got our process all nicely set up here, and we've got our all our steps within our process, and we're very happy. Let's go and link it in JD Edwards. What I've done is I've linked it on the standard invoice entry screen, and I've linked it to a separate button. You can link orchestrations to the OK button or to any of the buttons, delete, whatever, the form, exits, etc. We can link it to any of them, but I've decided to link it to its own separate button. It is a form extension that we use to link it. So if I click on form extension, you'll see that first of all I've got this add button option here, and I've got associate orchestrations, and this is what we're going to use. So the first thing I did was I added a button, and it brought in this button over here. I can just drag and drop it where I want it, so I'll drop it over here and I'll give it a name. And there's my button already. Then I click on Associate Orchestrations, and here I simply fill in the blanks. So in the control, I say that's where I want it to be. And so I want, when the button is clicked for the control called a name, it could also have been the OK button, and then there are various options there, etc. But I actually want it just to be this one for now. When the button is clicked, then what do we want to do? Next, pick the orchestration you want to link it to. I'll link it to this orchestration, thank you. And next, okay, well that orchestration, as we've seen before, has got various inputs. And I need to map those inputs. Where are these values coming from? Well, simply click on here and fill in the blanks again. Invoice number is coming from there, the document number is coming from there, document company from there, etc. And once all the fields are mapped, we simply hit next. This one I'll execute after the event, it's your choice, and then we click save, and here it is. There it is, all set up and ready to rock and roll. And it's as simple as that. And we save it and away we go. And that's how we can set up orchestrations in order to automate processes within JD Edwards.